Hey everybody, welcome back to TheByteBit, and in this video we're going to just spend a few minutes looking over the latest release of Ubuntu, that's 17.10 Beta 2. And before we jump into the OS and take a look at some of the big changes that we're expecting at the final release, I do want to point out just a few things so that we have them in mind as we look through this. The first thing is that this is Beta 2, as I said, and for those of you that are not familiar with the canonical release cycle, it's the parent company for Ubuntu, Beta 2 is really meant for people to, QA the software and find any last-minute bugs that might be, under the hood that they need to fix and resolve before the final release comes out. So no real significant changes or implementations or additions are expected. All of that has been frozen. And this is, like I said, just a QA release that gets sent out. It's the last beta release out on the roadmap before they, push out that, release candidate or that quote-unquote final version. And speaking of which, we're supposed to get the final release on October 19th of this year. So probably in about a month or so, we'll get this delivered to us for the masses to use and download. Now, with any release of Ubuntu, there are always a bunch of flavors or distros out there that you can actually download and play with. The two that I particularly like to use are Ubuntu Mate and Budgie. I particularly like their desktop environment. So, if you do want to try them out and see how they configure the operating system, the applications that they install or that they implement, the language that they use for design and aesthetics, I'll list the links down below in the description. There'll be direct links to the ISOs. You can go ahead and download them and throw them into a VirtualBox and see how they fare. So 17.10 is the version, as I said, and there's an important note about that version. This is not an LTS release, and LTS stands for long-term support, and those releases are the most stable. They are the ones that have the software that's been tested the most, quote-unquote, or software that's been put through the paces. The kernel for the Linux operating system is also well known. So, for people that need to use that in their small businesses or, important infrastructure, they really want to use the LTS versions. This is 17.10. This is considered a 6-month release or a baby release. The LTS is actually expected in April of next year. So let's jump in and take a look and see what the operating system has to offer. So here we are at the login screen. I'm going to go ahead and click on the username here. And if you click on the cogwheel for a quick second, what you'll notice is that you're presented with two options here by default. Now, normally when you want to switch the desktop environment, you would click the cogwheel and choose your environment of choice, whether it's Mate or Gnome in this case. So you'd have those listed there, and it makes life much easier. You can select the environment you want, log in, and move on from there. Well, in this case, it's actually showing you two, Ubuntu and Ubuntu Xorg, and I just want to point out a difference here. By default, the compositor, the actual protocol that is used for interpreting the windows, the actual layout, fluid motions of them, the way that they're drawn to the client or the user, that process is changed with this release of Ubuntu, and that is now using the Wayland approach or the Wayland compositor. And below that, you'll see an option for the Ubuntu Xorg. Xorg, or X, is the previous compositor that was used, the display server that was used for many, many years. And so, Ubuntu's trying to make this a, graceful transition. And so you actually have the option to log into Ubuntu using the old compositor. I know this a little bit on the inner workings of the operating system, and for most folks out there who simply just want to use the operating system for their software and music and photos and Facebook and email and such, it really won't make a difference. They won't even care. But it is a point worth mentioning because it's a pretty big change as far as the compositors go. So I'm going to go ahead and just get back into the password box here, and we're going to go ahead and log in and get to the desktop. So now that we're logged in, one of the biggest changes that you've probably picked up on, especially if you've used older versions of Ubuntu, is that we're no longer being presented with the Unity desktop environment, and instead we're shown the Gnome or the Gnome desktop environment. And I, for one, couldn't be happier. In fact, when Canonical first made that statement about a year ago, with their intention to switch, I thought that in time, once they do release it, the adoption numbers for the distro will actually increase, and hopefully that turns out to be the case. Now, this is exactly what you'd see if you actually install this particular release. I mean, I have installed some applications which I like to do in order to test out an operating system or a distro or release, and so I've just copied them over, placed them onto the dock here for ease of access. And I want to start by actually opening up a terminal and looking at the release information so we can see exactly what's being presented to us. So let's start by right-clicking and click on Open a Terminal here. We'll take a look at the OS release information. Obviously, Ubuntu is the name, makes sense. 17.10 is the current release version. The name for this release is actually called Artful Aardvark. Find that interesting. And another point of interest here is the ID like. It's listed here as Debian. 2 points I wanted to bring up, just an FYI really, for those folks who are new to the Linux world, coming in from Windows or possibly Macs. There are two terms. First one is upstream and the second one is downstream. So in the case of upstream, really what we're talking about is the original developer, original operating system, original source code that was used to derive this particular version or iteration of an application, or in our case here, the OS. So in Ubuntu's case, it actually is derived from Debian, which is a Linux system all by itself. And in fact, when you start to download software from links or repositories, you will often see notes or descriptions saying Debian/Ubuntu, just pointing out the fact that both of them are equal in this sense, and the software can be used for both operating system environments. So downstream, by comparison, really refers to the branched or split release of the particular operating system, application, or update you're referring to. In the Ubuntu world, there's actually a number of downstream releases. One in particular I just want to point out, it's Linux Mint. I particularly prefer Linux Mint for users that are new to the Linux world. It works very well out of the box, and I think has some really great features that make it a good candidate for initial testing for folks in Linux. Now, there are upstream releases and downstream releases for many of the Linux operating systems out there. You can just do a quick Google and get a bunch of information on that. But in terms of Ubuntu, the upstream release for Ubuntu is Debian. Downstream are Linux Mint and a few of the others out there that are available for download. So the next feature I wanted to take a quick look at is the version of the desktop environment that is going to be supplied with this next release of Ubuntu. And as I mentioned earlier, that Unity, the old desktop environment, has sort of been put aside, and Gnome is now the desktop of choice. And so if we just open up a terminal window here and we type in version, we could see that Gnome 3.26 is actually installed. And I'll put a link in the description to the actual list of changes and updates from the Gnome website, so you guys can take a look at that if you're interested in. So my understanding is that 3.26 will be the version that will be released with the official OS on the 19th of October. So while we're on the terminal window here, we're just going to take a look at the kernel version for a quick second. And as you can tell, that the release of Ubuntu is going to come with 4.13. I think 4.13 is the latest version that's available for us to use from the Linux folks. Now, there is other long-term release versions that I think are scheduled for a couple of years apart. I think the most recent long-term release was 3.x. That came out in May of this year. Nonetheless, this is the latest version that's available, I believe. So, it's good to see that they're applying it in here. And, the operating system will go through multiple tests, multiple QA sessions with many folks around the globe. And so hopefully if there are issues that occur with the kernel, I'm sure there'll be patches that come up like any other OS. So one point that I want to bring up along the side of this release is that Ubuntu is sort of going the way of other operating systems or other distros for Linux, in that they're going to be discontinuing the 32-bit release of the operating system. And there is an argument to be made with the fact that folks do like to utilize their older hardware, older laptops and desktops, and they like to throw on a a 32-bit Linux version and make use of the hardware, so essentially having a computer that isn't just sitting there like a paperweight. But in this day and age, I think as hardware changes and the prices drop for new processors and memory and motherboards and such, so I really think 64-bit should be the default standard. In fact, I think we need to progress in that direction. And so I, for one, actually agree with the idea of leaving the 32-bit world behind and moving on to the 64-bit and utilizing it as much as possible. So one of the other things that I like to focus on, or at least take a glance at when I'm testing out a new operating system, especially in the Linux world, is the file system. The file system is really one of the most important things when actually setting up the partitions and being able to write files and read files, how large those files can be. Journaling, which is basically a way of a snapshot in case your disk becomes corrupted and trying to recover. So the file system is very important, to say the least. Now there are a few that are really sort of at the top of the list that the OS vendors will use, or the distros will use. Now for Ubuntu, ext4 is the file system, and I'm going to show you that real quick. In fact, if I open up the search here and I type in disk, it's the first choice here, and you can see on the left hand side I've got the actual operating system disk here. Now this is a virtual machine, VMware, so obviously that's why it's listed as VMware Virtual. It shows you the disk drives, and if you had any USB drives connected, it would also show you those as well. But if you take a look at the right hand side, you can see that it's actually showing you ext4. Now ext4 and ext3 are commonplace, you'll see them. I think ext more so now, because it's sort of the standard default, I think, for most vendors to use and most distros to utilize. And ext4 obviously improves on ext3 with the size of the files you can have, whether or not you want journaling. There's so much to it. In fact, I'll put a link down that I use and sort of refer to frequently in the description when I want to just freshen up my information or my knowledge base on file systems. So ext4 is a great choice. Obviously I wouldn't have expected different in the Ubuntu world. They've been using ext4 for a bunch of the releases that have come in the past, so it's just continuing on with what they've been using so far. So before we switch over to another feature or looking at some other part of the operating system, I just wanted to take a second and show the same information through the terminal. And the reason behind that is, for the folks that are new to the Linux world and, have this idea or understanding that the terminal is something that's foreign and, something that cannot be understood easily or requires a master's degree in computing, it's really not the case. In fact, the terminal requires you to enter an explicit command in order to do what you want it to do. So, the more you use it, the more in control you are of the operating system, the more control you have of the changes to your system, the more actions you can take, or explicit actions you can take on your system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show this exact same process where we can take a look and see that it's a VMware model or disk, that it's got 54 gigs of space, and the extension, or the file system rather, that it's ext4. The device is SDA, which essentially means that it's the first disk, right? So serial or SCSI disk A is really what it's pointing to. Dev is just device. And so, the idea being that you can see the same exact thing through a command, and you can also perform the same action. So let's go ahead and close this out. And I'm going to go ahead and open up a new terminal here. And let me just go over this command real quick. Sudo, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the command, is really just switching the user to do or perform an action. And so what I'm saying is I want you to perform this command or run this command as another user. The command is parted. Parted is an application that is designed to show you the partitions and file systems and disks on your system, and it's very powerful. It allows you to get really granular with the configuration and control of your disks and partitions. So it's heavily used for obvious reasons. The -L is just a command that allows you to list the contents, and so when I hit this, it's actually going to ask me for the password for this current account. And when I hit enter, you'll see that it presents the same exact information thereabouts for what we just saw from the GUI. We can see that it's a VMware model, that the disk is SDA, it's got 54 gigs of space. And you can, if you look down here, it's number 1. It shows you the size, it shows you the primary, and it even shows you the extension. Now, there are other bits of information that you may need, like the free space, use space, the IOs, or the physical extents, or logical extent information. So there's a bunch that you can do here, but my main point is I don't need to be a rocket scientist to use the terminal. If I need to look up a certain command, or if I need to look at something, it's really not that much more difficult or complex than typing in a single line to get the data that I need. So while we have the terminal window open, let's go ahead and take a look at the next feature, or the next change. Now, this particular change actually occurred in the 17.04 release of Ubuntu, and it has to do with the swap file. And I think even though it did occur in the previous release, I think it's a good point worth making and understanding, because it's a change that it's pretty significant in terms of how the operating system usually works. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is type in a command. And as I said, this has to do with the swap file. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with swap, think of it as a container that is used in lieu of memory. So if your system has, say, 5 gigs of memory on it, and the operating system is running out of that 5 gigs because you have too many applications open, or you have a particular application open that's just usurping all of that resource or all of that memory, the operating system will then go to a swap file or a swap partition and try to use that as additional memory. Now, back in the day, this actually got used to a certain extent, and what they used to do was create the swap as a partition on the physical disk, or the logical disk, or the virtual disk. It actually was a partition, and the general rule of thumb is that they would create it, or give it a size of about double your memory. So if your system had 5 gigs, they would make the swap about 10 gigs. And the reason for that has to do with a number of things, including when your system went into like a hibernation mode, it needed enough memory to store all of that data so it wouldn't be lost. And so the partition was used for many years, and in fact there's still operating systems out there, distros out there, that use a partition for the swap. Well, as I said, in 17.04 release of Ubuntu, they decided to switch from a partition on the disk to a file. And this is what this command is actually showing us. And you can see that it's actually showing us the swap file, and the type is a file, and it's giving you the size, which is about 2 gigs here in size. And now, the big change, according to Ubuntu, is actually pretty simple, and I think it makes sense. Over time, with the prices of RAM or memory that one would put into their computers, it really isn't that big of a bottleneck as it used to be back in the day. Memory was always very expensive, and one of the things that we had to save up for when we had to build a computer or a laptop. And so nowadays, with memory being as available and being as inexpensive as it is, you really don't have to worry about creating a partition, making it twice the size of the existing memory, not the disk, and utilizing it. In fact, I would venture to say that on default systems, general systems where people are using it for music and surfing the web and email and YouTube, you really won't even use the swap file, because you have enough memory. The system is refined enough, or I think it understands how to use existing memory well enough, and you really don't use it. So long story short, it is there because it is a feature that could be used at a certain point, or if conditions match up, but in reality, it's very unlikely that you would use it. And if you take a look at the used column, that's really the important one here, because it's telling you how much of that 2 gigs is used. Okay? And in my system, now granted I'm not really running that many processes or that many applications, but it's really using nothing at this point. And in all of my testing, even on my main systems where I run many different flavors or distributions of Linux and even Windows, I mean, it's it doesn't really get used as often or as much as you would think. And that's pretty much it. Now, in the Windows world, they do have a similar process or a similar feature. If you're interested in that, it's actually called a page file, and it does the exact same thing. It's I think by default stored on your local disk or your drive C, and it tries to set itself up as additional memory, quote unquote, in case the system needs it for use. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the default applications that come with this release of Ubuntu. And as I said earlier in the video, it's very likely that what you see here will be available on the final version or the final release on the 19th of this month. But let's take a look and see what we get. So there are a bunch of applications that come by default installed out of the box for the operating system, which I think are great. They get you, off and running basically with whatever your primary use of the operating system would be. So case in point is an Office suite. In this case, it comes with LibreOffice 5. And for almost anybody out there that's used Linux or tried Linux or uses it at work, I'm sure he or she has installed LibreOffice or tried LibreOffice or is using LibreOffice right now. It's a pretty powerful word processor. Obviously, it's open source and it's an entire suite. It comes with its own versions of Excel and PowerPoint. So obviously, if you need an Office suite, it's one of the go-tos in the Linux world. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and as I said, it's version 5. Let's see what's the full version here that it comes with. So 5.4 is the release, and all points indicate that this is the version that you'll get on the final version of the OS. So let's go ahead and close this out, and we'll go ahead and take a look at something else. So apart from the Office suite that you get, you also get some games like Mines and a card game as well. But I want to take a look at the file manager real quick because it's obviously an important part of any operating system, whether it's Mac or Windows or Linux. And so let's go ahead and click on Files here. And in the Mac world, it's called Finder. In the Windows world, it's called Explorer. And over here, it's a file manager. Now, the default file manager for Gnome, which is the desktop environment that Ubuntu is utilizing, is called Nautilus. And the Nautilus file manager it looks simple, but it offers all of the functionality and features that you'd expect in a file manager, to say the least. So let's take a quick look. You can see that the landing section here is the home folder, and you can see all of my folders in here. You can double click and navigate through. You've got the navigation here, the breadcrumbs that you can just click back on. Quick and easy, simple clicks get you to where you need to go, and straightforward. You also have a search feature here that you can search for anything you'd like, just like in any other file manager or file explorer. You also have different views. Now granted, there are some file managers that allow you to utilize different views, some more 3D intensive, some more detailed than others, but this is pretty simple. You have an icon view where you see the folders and names, or you've got a details view where you can see the size and when it was modified and so on. So you also have a quick action menu, if you will, where you can open up, create a new folder, or you can open up a new tab. In fact, I want to make this point here because it's something that I think once you have and you start to use, you sort of wonder why it isn't available, in everything or in every operating system. In 2017, late 2017, almost 2018, the Windows operating system, even Windows 10, latest and greatest, doesn't allow you to utilize multiple tabs in the Explorer window, which is easy to actually just click back and forth. I mean, it's simple, but it doesn't have it yet. So the reason I bring this up is because even the one of the most widely used operating systems in the world still doesn't have some of the features that Linux does, and some of the features within the Linux operating systems are just completely beneficial, and much better implemented than the others. So from this menu option here, you can actually change the size, magnify or zoom in on the icons, and to your preference. You can actually undo, redo like you normally would expect. If you deleted a folder by accident, you want to undo that command or that action. You can choose your columns. In fact, you can right click and let me just close this tab out here. You can right click and choose any of the columns that you might want, like who owns it, what type is the file, group, permissions, all of the normal attributes, features that you'd expect, as I said, is in this file manager from Nautilus or from Gnome. And you can also take a look and add other locations in here, which is great, because you obviously want to add multiple locations, whether they're UNC paths or network shares or FTPs. You can simply just click on it. A Windows network is very simple to add. You just go and search your computers, attach it, and you're ready to go. You can even enter in a manual server address here. If you're one of those folks that has, the file servers out there like NAS devices for storage of all your files, you can just type that in and get to them here. So again, simple, straightforward, has the features and attributes you're looking for, and easy enough to use that you should not have a problem finding your way around the file system if you need to. So let's go ahead and close out of the file manager here, and let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of other applications. Let's start with the calendar app, and this is a straightforward calendar with all the features and options that you'd expect. In fact, it works very well out the box. Really don't have any issues with it, and it's simple to add. I can just click once here, type in my event. I can edit details and add in more specific details, time and date, repeat, and so on. Click done, and if I click on the time, the date and time at the top here, you'll see that the event shows up. Simple, easy. It's actually quite elegant in terms of the design, if you ask me. And of course I can clear it all, and I'll go ahead and click out. And let's go ahead and delete the event here since we no longer need that. So again, pretty good implementation of a calendar application. So let's go ahead and take a look at settings now, because I think settings is actually a big portion of any operating system, especially in terms of configuring the feature set that it comes with. So let's go ahead and open that. In fact, I should mention that I do have a couple of pages. I think you've seen me scroll back and forth here. You can see the actual radio dials here that are selected. So I'm on page 2 of 2, 1 of 2. So, and the bunch of applications is here. Like I said, I did install a few of them. Steam, because obviously it's very important to have, and I've been testing that out as well. I installed Play on Linux, which is a front end for an application called Wine, and Wine allows you to install Windows apps in the Linux operating system. So pretty straightforward there. And obviously it has its own caveats and restrictions and a whole bit of background for it. But again, that's the use for the application. So let's go ahead and take a look at settings. And on the left hand side, you can see the navigation here, pretty self-explanatory of what each section does. There's no guessing game here. In fact, the search I found to be quite useful. You can type in search here, and let's say I want to change the background of the operating system. If I type in back, it comes up with background. I can click on the option here, comes right up. I can choose background or lock screen and choose some really beautiful pictures. I think what you'll notice as you start testing out Ubuntu or other flavors of Linux, the desktop wallpapers are actually pretty good. They're high quality or high resolution, and they're just fantastic. They're beautiful. So I think you'll like them if you're into the wallpapers and the feature. So I'm gonna go ahead and cancel this out here for a second. Wi-Fi, I don't particularly have an adapter. This is a virtual machine. Bluetooth, I haven't enabled this feature. Background we just went over, so you can see dock, notification, search. Few things I want to go through in here. Obviously, if you want to install it and kind of just go through them yourself, I recommend that. Dock is the first, because that's the dock below here. And if you notice, I actually switched it to the bottom. But the thing I want to point out in this is, and I think this is important to kind of understand in the Linux world as compared to Mac or Windows. Linux really is all about your preferences, your desired changes and environment you want to use or you want to implement. Now, Ubuntu doesn't necessarily restrict you from tinkering with every feature of the OS, but it requires, a knowledge, a skill set in order to do that. There are other distributions of Linux out there that will gladly let you change things from the pixel size and depth and width to the color of each icon and taskbar, changing around the Windows buttons, like you see here with the minimize, maximize, and close. There are distributions out there that are completely open, and that is a strength for an operating system, in my opinion, because you want to have full control over what you do. Whether it's having an automobile or an operating system, you want full control for what you can do to it, because obviously you own it. It is yours, and anything else would be, less than acceptable in my opinion. Now, that isn't to say that I don't use other operating systems. Of course I do. In fact, I depend on them for work because they're so widely implemented. Mac and Windows are quite popular, as I'm sure you realize. So getting back to this here, the dock is a perfect example in the Linux world or in the Ubuntu world of a refined approach. It's not constrained, it's refined. It gives you the features that the developers thought you may want to change off the bat. Again, you can install another desktop environment here and go to town and update and tweak as many things as you'd like. So keeping this straightforward, I think, out of the box, so that anybody coming from the other environments, the other OSs like Mac and Windows, I think is a great decision on Ubuntu's part. And the dock is a perfect example. Again, you can change the location of it, from the bottom right or left, or you can choose to auto hide and change the icon sizes if that's what you need to do. Again, simple, it's straightforward, but I think it helps with the transition for folks from the Mac and Windows world. Notifications too is same thing. I mean, you have the toaster pop-ups, as they're called in Windows, messages that'll come up based on the applications, either in the top right or the bottom right here. And search. So search has a couple of points to it that I think it's worth mentioning. Ubuntu, for whatever reason they decided to, I mean, obviously they're a company that needs to make money, and I know they are releasing open source software, but a number of years ago they actually integrated the Amazon search, product search, ad search into the operating system. And whatever side of that debate you may fall upon, whether you believe that Canonical as a company needs to make money and implementing the ad search or the Amazon affiliate link is understandable, great, or if you're completely set against that because you think it doesn't follow with the moral or ethical code of Linux and the operating system world, whatever side you're on, obviously, that's for you to make a judgment call on. But Canonical got a lot of heat about it, and as a result they decided that they wanted to remove that quote-unquote search link between Ubuntu and Amazon. And I think they did that in version 16.x a couple of years ago. So the search feature is actually not implemented. So in the search, what you'll see is a bunch of different applications that you can use or Ubuntu will search through when you perform a search. So if I would actually click on this, when I load up the page here and I type in, let's say, wine, it'll present me with the application that I have installed, because Play on Linux is wine essentially, but then it goes out to the Ubuntu store and looks for results there and presents them to you. Now it's very simple. I can just come back in here, let's close this out here, and say I don't want you to search the Ubuntu store. So I'll come back in, I'll type in wine again, and you see it's only showing me my installed applications. Again, you have control over what it searches, what it doesn't search, and how it should perform. So that's the search feature right there. Online accounts, you can actually set them up, and obviously in this day and age, all of us have something, whether it's a media server or Dropbox or Google. It's here for you to install and use. Privacy is also very important. As I said, I think it is key, and it's also paramount in the operating system, because whoever controls the operating system knows a great deal about you. It knows what you're typing, when you're typing. It has logs that it can utilize and send home. And it's one of the reasons why I started focusing more on Linux for my personal computers, because Windows as a methodology, Microsoft as a methodology approach, are choosing to limit the control the user has on what it can see and cannot see. And I'm referring to Microsoft. And if you take a look at some of the settings in Windows 10, you'll notice that there is actually sections in there that you can't disable in terms of sending reports and data to Microsoft. There's actually an option where you can either choose basic or full in sending your data back to Microsoft. And if you actually take a couple of minutes to read through the policy, it actually outlines that it's taking into account your Bing searches, and it has cookies and basically trying to track you for what it thinks is important. obviously to sell ads or to find out more information about you. And it's something I don't particularly like. I know of tons of people that feel the same way, and of course folks that don't know any better don't know any better. But for us out there who are interested in trying to see what else is available, I think it is one of the key reasons why folks are moving to Linux, why folks need to move to Linux. And Linux, in terms of the desktop approach, needs to keep on developing and improving, because I have a feeling that Microsoft is only going to keep restricting and hiding, if you will, all of the data that it collects on you, and it'll prevent you, the user, from disabling those features. And Windows 10 has them now. I mean, they're in there now, and you have to just deal with it. So privacy on here is very important. You can look and take a look at location services, usage, and history. You can clear what you need to. Problem reporting, you can do manual approach. Now, it's good that it has these few resources or these few options for you, because again, there's not much that it needs to do. I don't want it to record my behavior by default. I don't want it to call home by default. I just need it to work and do what I tell it to do. So sharing, you can set up file sharing here for other computers. If you have other VMs or other computers out there that you would do, Windows has it, Mac has it as well. Sound and power, network as well, you can set that up. Devices. Details is actually important. Details about the operating system. You can find out that it's 64-bit. I've got roughly 4 gigs of memory in here. Processor type, and how much is on the disk, or how big the disk is for the operating system. You can also go to users and create more users if you need to. Date and time. So again, getting back to the whole point of being simple, straightforward, but with a refined look and feel and approach to the operating system. So these are the settings here. Again, I suggest if you are inclined to look into Linux and especially Ubuntu, download the release. It's going to be out in about 11 days or something like that, or 15 days actually, and throw it into a virtual machine. You don't have to worry about anything, losing any data, and give it a try. So let's go ahead and close this out here. Let's take a look at something else. I'm going to leave applications like Calculator and Google Chrome, Firefox, because obviously you guys have seen it before. They're browsers, they're independent of the operating system, and they work like you would expect them to. Let's take a look at the terminal. Well, we did see the terminal here. Here's the Ubuntu software store. Let's take a look at that. The idea of presenting a store or a landing page for the operating system, I think, is wonderful. And in fact, you'll see it with Linux Mint and a bunch of other distros and other releases of Linux out there. It's great. I mean, you can open this up. You can see all of the software that's available to us. You can type in a quick search, find the application you need, look at reviews on them, see if they're installed already or not. So you can actually just click on it and remove it as well. So it's an uninstaller, it's an installer, plus it's a store, all in one. And I think Ubuntu's done a pretty decent job of it. I mean, you can go to installed and it'll populate a list of all of the packages that is installed on this particular OS. And you can also run the updates as well. So I think this might take a few seconds, but here we go. And you can just scroll down, find the thing that you don't like, and remove it. So pretty simple here that you can work through, straightforward. Updates shows you that it's up to date, and if there were any updates here, you would just apply, or you can just refresh, and it'll go out and search its servers and see if there are any updates for the operating system or applications that it needs to update for you, and it'll let you do that. So simple. Let's go ahead and close that out. Let's click on something else and see. So something does come to mind, and I want to point that out, and it's in reference to what I just mentioned earlier about the Amazon link. Now, the search feature has been removed, by default, so it's not trying to include the Amazon web search or Amazon ads while you look for something. But Amazon still exists in Ubuntu, and it exists in the form of an affiliate link. And I just want to show you that real quick. Now, by default, when you actually install the operating system, Let me get back to the desktop here. What you'll notice is that you'll have an Amazon link on your dock. And it's really just a Google link or a URL, actually. When you click on it, it opens up your browser of choice, and it takes you to the Amazon webpage, and you can go ahead and search. And, you know, obviously, if you buy something, I think there's a affiliate kickback that Amazon will pay to, you know, Canonical or Ubuntu. Now, and that's fine. You know, you may land on the side of, you know, that being okay, and you might even want to help them out. Obviously, Canonical is a company, and they do need to make money because obviously they need resources and they need to pay for those resources. So there is certainly an argument to be made. But again, it's up to you, because if you want to, and we'll do it right now actually, you can go ahead and just delete it. In fact, I'm going to show you just that. I'm going to go ahead and close this out here. I'm going to remove this first from the dock. I'm going to say remove from favorites by right-clicking on it. That'll remove it. And I'm going to go ahead and go back into the launcher here, because you can see the app is still here. And obviously I can right click and say add to favorites, and it comes right back. So let's go ahead and remove it, and then let's remove it all together. You can actually just right click on this and say show details, and it'll bring up the Ubuntu software app. And this is something actually I did notice here. The first time you do this, it doesn't actually pick up on the app. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and we'll go ahead and try again. There it is, and you can see that it shows you that it's installed. In fact, if you actually click on it, you can see some reviews. Some folks have given it some pretty bad reviews, like why is this still here, and just remove it. Only Jeff and Mark want this. Mark is the CEO of Canonical, and Jeff, of course, is CEO of Amazon. So it's a simple process. You can just click remove and say yes, I want to remove. It'll ask you for your password, which is expected, and you're done. You're out of there. In fact, I want to show you something else. You can obviously reinstall the app here, which is great. But if you close out of the App Store or the software store and you go back into it, in fact, I'm going to launch it from the dock, and I'm going to go to the search option here, and I'm going to type in Amazon. You saw it show up for just a split second, but now it's hidden. You know, I can hit enter and nothing will come up. And click on it again, type in Amazon, and you can see the search shows up with all of the Amazon links or related software that it thinks you might be interested in, but not the URL app that we just removed. So I'll click this again. You can see that here. It doesn't show up. So it seems like, you know, Ubuntu is smart enough to know, or the app, the software store is smart enough to know that if you remove it, you really don't want to install it again. I guess that might be something they're trying to be proactive about with all of the users' comments that they've received. So yeah, good thing to keep in mind. Again, it's not hard-coded into the system. It's not like you cannot remove it. And as you saw, within just a few clicks, I was able to get rid of it from the operating system. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the next thing here. I'm going to go ahead and click on the launcher again. And let's scroll down here and take a look at the software updater. Now, I did misspeak when I actually showed you the software store and I looked at the updates. I mentioned that when you search for updates, it's going to go ahead and try to look for updates for the OS and for applications. And really, what I mean by that is it really will only look for updates to your software, to your currently installed software. What you want to do is also check for updates to the operating system. And Ubuntu has an app for that. Let's go ahead and open up the launcher here, and it's called Software Updater. And if you open up the app, what it's going to do is try to reach out to the web servers for Canonical for Ubuntu, and it'll search against its database and catalog for any of the missing updates, security patches, you know, that it thinks is important and you need to install and update. So as you can see here, I've got an update that it needs to apply. You can actually click on the downward facing arrow to see details about what it's going to update. You can see there's a bunch here actually that it needs to do, and you can install it. And then I might even ask you for a reboot, which is fine. The next thing I want to point out in the software updater is actually the settings, because the settings is important. And I think when you set up a new distribution of Linux, when you set up Ubuntu or any operating system for that matter, one of the things that you should configure is the update schedule. When do you want the updates to be applied? When do you want to search for them? When do you want to install them? From where should they be downloaded? And so settings gives you all those options and much, much more. So let's go ahead and take a look at it now and see what's important or for us to examine initially. So by default, when you do click on Updates, or the Settings button actually, what you'll get is this window. And there's a few tabs I just want to quickly go over for those of you that are new to Linux, new to Ubuntu, and especially want to make sure that their updates are in order and that security patches are also applied to the system as they should be. So the Updates tab is your first landing page. That's where you'll be taken to every time you click on Settings. And most of the settings or most of the choices here are self-explanatory. I mean, it's asking you to install updates from important security updates recommended and unsupported updates as well. So you have those choices, whether you want to install only updates that are recommended or security updates. It's up to you. Whichever you check is the behavior that it will follow. Now, it asks you for a schedule. Do you want to automatically check for updates? I do this daily. Even in my systems that I use for testing, it doesn't matter. You can go ahead and install those updates. And it asks you and says, when there are security updates, what would you like me to do? Just download and install, or just download or display them for you. So you have all the options in the world for you to select from based on how you want to configure the updates for your operating system. And then it actually shows you a schedule for other updates, whether it should be displayed to you weekly or immediately. So you can play around with these settings and set them to be the way that you want them to be. The last one is important, and I think, depending on how aggressive, for lack of a better word, you want to be with the latest releases of the operating system from Ubuntu, you can choose an option for this last choice here, and it says notify me when a new Ubuntu version is available. And you can say for any new version, for long-term support versions, or never. For people that are using this in their actual day-to-day operating system for their main computer, that they have all their documents and everything like that, you may not want to install every update that's available for you, or at least not right away, right? You want to make sure that if a new version comes out, the major bugs and issues have been worked out. And this is true for everything, whether you have an iPhone and you install every update for that, or you have a Google phone, or you have Windows or Mac. Getting the latest and greatest can be fine. It can work well, but in your actual production environment or actual main computer where all your software documents and applications are there, especially if you use it for work, you want to be a little bit hesitant so that you're not on the bleeding edge of the latest stuff and possibly face more problems than you need to. So if you're using it in a test environment or a box that you have no problems with, that you can just restore at any point, then I would say, and download and try the new version. If you want to, get the software that's been, thoroughly tested with, great deal of support for it, you can choose the long-term versions or the long-term support versions, or you can choose never. Either way, it'll ask you for your password to make the changes. So that's up to you, and that's the Updates tab. Next tab I want to take a look at is the Ubuntu Software tab. And it essentially says the downloadable software that you get from the internet. Where do you pull that from? And you can see it's canonical supported, free and open source. You've got the community maintained, proprietary drivers, and restricted by copyright illegal issues. So you can choose what type of software you want to be able to download from the internet. And, most operating systems have this type of feature in, some form or fashion that they utilize. Now you can also download the source code as well, which is fine if that's what you're into and you want to take a look at the software. That's one of the great things about Linux and open source software, right? You can not only get free access to the software and you can utilize it the way you need to, but you can also look under the hood and take a look and see how the code is written and what it's actually doing. The option below that is also important, and this is where the location of the servers are going to be that it tries to contact when it's looking for updates. And so you can actually choose a main server, or in this case I'm in the United States, so that's where I choose. But you can say other, and if you take a look, there's actually a whole slew of servers that you can select. Obviously, there are different countries as well. Or you can even have the application choose for you. You can simply click select best server, and it'll go run a couple of tests to see where the box is geographically speaking and which server is closest to it, and it'll find that server and select it for you to be used in the future. I'm gonna go ahead and cancel this because the one that I have now works just fine for me. All right, and it actually says install from the CD-ROM drive here too. You can select this as an option so that when it's searching for updates for you, it'll also look on the CD-ROM drive Obviously, I don't particularly use the drives. Only when I install the operating system is really when I apply one to my virtual machine. So I leave it unchecked most of the time. So that's the two tabs I wanted to go over. There's a bunch of other stuff here, and I'll be posting videos on actually the other tabs, looking at authentication and the keys and all of that. So for now, keeping it simple and straightforward, these two tabs really you should look at and just configure. Even if you don't change anything, as long as you're aware of how the updates will be applied and where they're coming from, I think it's key to keeping your system up to date. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of the software updater because I actually don't need it for now. So there's a test box, and so it's not important that I update it. So the next point I wanted to go over is the root user. Now this isn't specific to Ubuntu or this particular release. It's specific to new installations of Linux, and I get this question often enough where I think by making a point about it, it'll serve as an FYI, so that if you guys, especially those of you who are new to Linux, do come across this issue or this block, you'll be able to fix it very quickly. So the question that I get from time to time is, how come I can't change my account to root? Or how come I can't log in as root user? I installed the software, everything went well, it didn't give me any error messages, but for some reason, this command or this app I want to install or this change I want to make under the hood, requires that I log in as root or perform the command as root, and I can't do it. Well, the reason for that is because if you chose the default installation of the operating system, in this case Ubuntu, meaning you didn't make any special changes or changes to the way that the install works or added this after the fact, what you'll notice is that the root user doesn't have a password. And so you need to set that password so you can log in as root and perform the actions you need. So I'm going to show you something through the terminal as well to help you out. Now in the Linux world, if you need to perform something, or if you need to apply a change, or you need to install an app, or modify a config file, you can do that all through the terminal. In fact, it's not too difficult to do that because nowadays we have utilities, text editors in the terminal, which are easier to use. You don't need to remember any keystrokes. You can just look at the menu system at the bottom and make your changes and save it. So let's go ahead and start by right-clicking on the desktop and choosing Open Terminal. And the message that you see here at the top is there because I have yet to run a command that was run as an administrator or run in an elevated state. And so that's why it's telling you, as sort of like a helpful hint, it says, if you want to run a command as an administrator, quote unquote, the root user, you need to use the sudo command, or sudo space and then the command. And this message will disappear once you have successfully logged in or you have successfully run a command as an administrator. Let me show that to you real quick before we move on with setting the password for the root user. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and type in a command that it's going to require me to use sudo. I'm going to say, fdisk-l is simply a command, is an application that looks at your disks and partitions on the particular server, and the -l prints out that list for you. Now, it's clearly telling you I don't have permission to do that. So what I need to do is I need to use sudo and that command again to get the information that I need. So I'm going to go ahead and run it again. And it's going to give me the information that I need after it prompts me for my password. Now, if my user account was set up by somebody, this is an existing system that was configured by some admin, I may not have the ability to run this command using sudo. In fact, I may not be part of that group of people that can do that. So just be aware of that. But this is a new install. This is what you should be able to do. Now, this is part A, that you need to run sudo and then the command in order to get the details. Now, if I close out of the terminal window and I get back into the terminal window, what you'll notice is I'm no longer presented with that reminder. Reason being that it knows successfully that you've run a command as sudo or as an administrator account, and so you don't need to display it again. It's just not needed. Well, that's part A, as I said, and part B is being able to log in as the root user itself. Now, obviously, I can run a command su/ or dash, and then space, and I can enter in the username I want to switch user to, right? So if I type in su- and I type in jsmith or any of the other users I've created, it'll prompt me for the password for that user, and I'll log in. If I leave it blank and I hit enter here, it's going to ask me for the password, and it's the password for root. By default, if you see this command su dash or su space dash, it's really asking the terminal to log you in as the root administrative account. Now, it doesn't have a password by default, as I said, and so we need to set that up. So whatever I type in here, including the password for my ByteBit account, it doesn't take me in. So what I need to do is type in a password that, type in a command that will let me change or apply a password for root. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Sudo again, because I need to run this command in an elevated state. Password is an application in the Linux world that allows you to set passwords for users, right? Nothing complicated here, simple to utilize. And then I'm going to go ahead and type in the username that I want to set the password for. So I'll hit enter. And the first thing it's doing is asking me for the password for my account. Again, it needs to verify that I have administrative privileges to perform this action. So let's go ahead and type that in. And now it's saying enter a new Unix password. Now it could be a little bit more detailed here. It could say enter in a new password for root, but the implication or the understanding is that that's what you're doing by default. It'll ask me to type it in again because obviously it wants to see if it matches, and there you go. It says password updated successfully. Now I can come back and run that same command as before. It'll ask me for the password, and I'll type in the password I just set, and there you go. I'm now logged in as root, and I have full access to the machine. I can make any change I deem necessary or that I need to make, and go on from there. Getting out of that account. It is generally recommended that you don't stay in the root user account. In fact, most of the actions and changes that you want to make, you should really do it as your original user, and then only if you need root access is when you would choose to do that. So what I would recommend is once you've logged in as root and you've made the changes or worked with the environment that you need to, go ahead and log out. You can simply type in exit and it'll log you out and take you back to your original account. So this, I know, isn't necessarily part of this release, but I get this question quite a few times, and it's just easier, and it's just one of those things that once you understand what's going on, you never really forget it. You know what you need to do, and it helps you along the way. So now that we've got the root user FYI out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and close out this window. And there is a new feature with the release of Ubuntu that I want to just focus on real quick. And it has to do with night mode. Now, more and more you're seeing that with your cell phones and your tablets that present a night mode that allows you to use it at night, and hopefully, remove the glare of the blue light so that this way it doesn't harm your eyes. Well, the Ubuntu operating system is no different, and they're trying to provide that functionality to you as well. So if I go ahead and click on the launcher here, and I'm going to type in night for a quick second, open up the displays, you can see that nightlight is the feature here listed for us, and if I click on it, it gives you some parameters to set. First of all, you can enable nightlight, and you can actually set the schedule, sunset to sunrise, because it'll be based on your time, or you can change it to manual, and you can set the nightlight the mode to be enabled and disabled based on a time frame or hour schedule that you prefer. And so obviously this is nothing dramatically new, but it is new for Ubuntu, and it's worth knowing that it's here in this release. And obviously if you're installing this on a laptop and you want to use this in bed at night, or you work in a darkened office, you can certainly have it enabled and help you out. So let's go ahead and close this out, and I'll close this out as well. So that really gets me to the end of the video, in the sense that I just want to give you my final thoughts on this release. Again, it's a beta 2, and we're expecting the final release in just a few days. But as an entry point to the Linux world, for those folks who are new to it, I don't think you can do much better. Now, there are flavors of this. There are other distros out there that work as well, but again, it's an all-in-one package. You can get the OS, the installer, install it for your friends, or install it for the users that you need to, and just try it out and let them experience Linux. And if they have any questions or issues, you should be able to get a lot of support from the forums. and the Ubuntu help site. There's a bunch of responses on Google and lots of resources for you to utilize in case there are issues. Just one of the things I want to impart as a takeaway is that you're not really alone. I mean, even though this is a open source developed by many developers across the globe, it's not something that you have to fend for by yourself. I mean, if you have issues, chances are other users out there do too, and you can always reach out to Canonical or go to the Ubuntu forums or Google, find out what a possible solution is and implement it. So there's, a good deal to be said for this release. I think, Ubuntu is going in the right direction, and I obviously didn't get a chance to go over everything. There's a bunch of new changes in the system with, more and more applications coming down the road, and, more functionality with connecting in third-party devices as well, networking and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So, there's a lot to take in here, but it is a great start. I think they're doing a great job so far, and I really want to thank you all for clicking and viewing the video. I know it's a little bit of a long one, but there's quite a bit to cover here, and hopefully you guys got some valuable information out of it. And if you do have any questions, please put them in the comments, and I'll be glad to respond as best as I can. And hopefully if you like the video, you can like and subscribe to the channel, and I will talk to you guys in the next one. Take care.